I think we're both probably quite unusual in that I don't think either of us experiences it very often. I think we're highly confident people.
We are.
Which is great. I'm
or
not
ignorant,
ashamed.
Or ignorant. It's one of the two.
We think we're better than we are. Who knows?
Welcome to PowrUp, a podcast full of insights for women that lead. Hosted by Nat and Kristen from Powrsuit, we're on a mission to amplify your impact as a leader. Join us each week and we'll share with you what's shaping our future, from AI to Gen Z. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss any episodes.
Hello, everyone. It's a beautiful day here in Wellington. We're recording this podcast inside, away from the sun. But there is no better day, we think, than to talk about fraud. When we say fraud, we're not talking about the fun kind of fraud, the fraud that Leonardo DiCaprio got to do in Catch Me If You Can, or Anna Delvey in Inventing Anna. We're talking about the dumb kind of fraud. The feeling of being a fraud. It's probably a feeling a lot of us know, we're pretty sure. The feeling of imposter syndrome. Kristen, have you ever experienced imposter syndrome?
I have, I think, once. Only once. And so I feel as though I don't relate to everyone who says they feel it all the time. We'll get to that. But I do remember distinctly being in New York. I was with a startup and we were looking to exit our startup to a big global multinational, very well-known brand. So I was spending a lot of time from little old New Zealand, and I'm just a Canadian girl that was over in New York in Manhattan in these crazy offices, very successful company. And we were trying to do this deal. And I remember sitting in a room. Now, this is a group of people that I would say, sorry if this is rude, but born with a silver spoon in their mouth. These are people that have been to the right schools. I mean, really fancy type of schools. They've been to Ivy colleges. And I think as a Canadian, we have this inferiority complex where we're like, they're so much better than us. And so it could be a Canadian thing. However, here I am, this little Kiwi now, sitting in these offices and all these people who are really smart and say the right things and wear the right clothing. And they're all from Ivy League schools and they're running this multinational business. And here I am trying to get this company that I was running to be sold into this environment. And initially I was like, I don't belong here. And there was absolutely these feelings of, I'm a fraud and I don't belong in this room. And so I think we will chat a lot more about that. But I felt like an imposter. Thankfully, I worked through it and happy to share about how I did that later and came out the other end. But I definitely remember that feeling of going, I actually don't belong in this world. It's not for me.
That's really interesting because you probably didn't belong in that world.
No, I didn't. This is not, I was born with, raised by a single mum. We were very frugal growing up. We had a very simple upbringing. I scraped by through to a university, had to get loans to do it, came out with student loans on the other end of university while people were going to all these fancy schools, and I just was the local school. And so that was a world that I felt very much not a part of. And almost not jealous of, but it's always so intriguing seeing how the other half live, isn't it?
And then also to suddenly find yourself plonked in there. I imagine, because when we talk about imposter syndrome, it's definitely something that they call an affliction of the highly successful. And I suspect your example perfectly encapsulates it of you suddenly find yourself in a world that you don't think you belong in. And I was at the Ed Sheeran concert a while ago, and it struck me because he's like rocking around on stage with his guitar and his like jeans and t-shirt. And it just struck me at one point, this is this dude from this small town somewhere in England, right?
Yeah.
And he's suddenly performing to stadiums around the world. That just must be the weirdest feeling.
He must be hit.
Yeah,
every once in a while, you must just go, what the actual?
Yeah.
What has happened here? How
Someone's
have I even?
Someone's going to wake up one day and tap me on the shoulder and go, this was a fun dream.
Yeah.
Time to wake
Eddie,
up now.
off you go.
Yeah.
Off you go back home. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I can agree. Have you felt it before, experienced it before?
Well, I think it's been really interesting doing some research for this podcast because I definitely think I've felt it. I think we're both probably quite unusual in that I don't think either of us experiences it very often. I think we're highly confident people.
We are.
Which is great. I'm
Or
not
ignorant.
ashamed.
Or ignorant. It's one of the two.
We think we're better than we are. Who knows? I actually love that about us. But I remember, like, I was thinking back to all these examples in my life, and probably the biggest one in some ways was kind of similar to yours. I started a business very, very young. And I mean, we're talking like 20. I was sitting in pitching to different people for business. I had a male co-founder at the time. And the number of times, and this is probably where the I'm a bit stupid comes in, the number of times I thought people assumed I was his assistant because of the way they treated me.
Well, they probably actually did.
Well, I now wonder, this is what I mean about dumb. They may have, but it also, that was at the time quite a common way to treat, well, and still is, treat women in meetings. They expect you to take notes. They expect you to do. But I remember at the time thinking, what is it about me that, like, I literally have come in and introduced myself as a co-founder of this company, and yet I'm being treated like I am somehow like this little kid in the room. To be fair, I was 20. I was a kid in the room.
Yeah.
But it's, again, that same feeling of I suddenly found myself, I didn't realize, like, I didn't have that same internal feeling. Like, I absolutely walk into every situation feeling like I deserve to be there. But the external information coming at me was that I really didn't deserve to be there or didn't belong there. So yeah, that's probably the main one for me. I feel like I felt it one other time in a very similar situation where I was working in a large organization. The people around me didn't look like me. They didn't act like me. They didn't have very similar values to me. And this is when I had a leadership coach, and she said, yes, you're suffering from imposter syndrome. You do not fit in here. You have found yourself in a world in which you do not belong, and every part of you is screaming, you do not belong here.
Yeah.
So those are kind of those two situations.
And I'm going to let you read the definition of imposter syndrome, but I thought it was so interesting off the back of your comment. It is what I've read one time about imposter syndrome. It's this ability to reconcile three aspects of our personhood. So this relates to you. So how we experience ourselves. So you're like, I'm all that. I'm so confident and I like deserve to be here. And then you say how we present ourselves to the world. So you probably went in and presented yourself probably fairly confident, if not like a little bit unsure if you started to get weird cues. But then you're trying to reconcile this, how the world reflects that self back to us. And that, to me, is possibly what crumbled for you, is it's this, your personhood is compiled of all these signals, how you're feeling, how you think you're acting, and how the world is telling you you're acting or what you should be or where you should be. And I think that's super interesting as you got caught up in that. But why don't you share the definition of imposter syndrome?
I don't have it written down, but I feel like roughly what we believe it to be is this idea that you will be found out. Found out, I think, is key here, that you're a fraud, that someday someone's going to come and tap you on the shoulder and say, you are not belonging, you don't deserve to be here, you've tricked everyone, jog on. You're
out. And that's actually the definition, so well done you. That's logged away somewhere.
I did write a few notes in my head.
It is great. And I think the sad thing about this is that it disproportionately affects women and women of color, which we'll get into later. But we did a quick poll on our LinkedIn to our Powrsuitors, and 89% claimed to have imposter syndrome. So we're talking about almost 100% of the population, at least of our followers anyway, that have claimed to have it.
Well, that tracks with
what is it?
What we read. I think it's about 82% globally. I mean, I can't imagine any of these numbers is 100% accurate. So we're basically getting up to almost everyone has experienced it. Yeah. And I think both of these numbers came out of a largely woman audience. So I don't know what it would be like overall. I imagine there's a lot of men who've experienced it too.
Absolutely.
I think Tom Hanks has.
Yes, and who was the other one that you wrote about recently? But yeah, they are generally high achieving people that do experience it. You set a very high bar. You doubt yourself that you're going to achieve it. If you do, you chalk it up to something else. You say it's just luck, or I'm going to be found out. And I think, it feels like a weird global phenomenon. Affliction?
A pandemic.
It's a pandemic.
It's probably a more, I mean, really, when you think about in terms of COVID, it's has about as much impact in our brains as COVID did physically. It's and well, maybe in our brains too. So I don't know if it's a good time now to give a bit of a history. I mean, we're all so used to this term. Everyone throws it around. How did it come about?
Yeah, this was two psychologists 50 years ago. So keep in mind the time that.
Was it like the 1990s now?
I mean,
it's 1970s.
It was it was probably in the 70s. It was a 5-year study done by these two.
50 years ago.
Still, a lot has changed in 50 years.
Yes.
We now have the internet. Psychologists Pauline Rose Clance, so Clance and Suzanne Imes. So Imes and Clance, they were two psychologists, and they believed they were frauds for a couple of reasons. They experienced this thing and they thought, we're noticing when they got into uni and they were teaching, they were in their professorhoods, they noticed a lot of their students, predominantly females, that were saying, I'm going to fail this exam. And they were the top of the class. So these are people that had a strange view on who they were and if they belonged. And yet all of their results and all the evidence pointed to they were incredible people, but they felt like frauds. So they set off on this 5-year study and they came up with a paper that actually, ironically, didn't get published. They got passed over for many, many years, but they actually called it imposter phenomenon. And they wrote this whole paper on imposter phenomenon. And it slowly, as they finally got this paper published, it started to gain traction and people started to say, ooh, I identify with this. Can I use this paper? Can I use this paper? But it wasn't really until social media that it started to absolutely take off. And now the whole world has imposter syndrome. So along the way it changed. But that was the origins, was these two relatively limited study over 5 years, professional white women, I should add, that felt as though they were fraudulent.
And high achieving white women. I feel like, were they at Harvard? Were they at an Ivy League school?
Probably.
I feel like because it said something that I read something that they hadn't.
That's where all the important people are, aren't they?
Yeah, in the Harvard something. So I presume. So I mean, this is sort of the 1% of the 1% studying this and feeling it, and which is fascinating that it spread so far and wide across so many different people.
Yeah.
So given it is such a big thing, and I think we should put a pin in the move from phenomenon to syndrome, because I think we should cover that soon later, because that's really important. Words are important. It's such a big thing. Is it actually a thing?
Well, they believe it is a thing. I don't think, now they've been recently interviewed by the New Yorker. They're shocked at how prolific it is now and how everyone claims to have it. It was not their intention. So is it a thing? I do think there are situations we find ourselves in where we feel fraudulent. And I should add, actually, where they found in their study, and this kind of brings back to like my home life and possibly why I don't have it, but they found two groups of people that tend to have it. They found one was children that had a brighter older sibling. Now, I've got a brighter older sibling. He's a genius. Like, he's actually
that's what your parents have told you your whole life.
No, he won math. He won, like, the Canadian Math Olympiad. Like, he is a all full scholarship, blah, 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 blah. So really smart. But I was probably deluded in my smarts, and I did just fine. Whereas my brother absolutely has imposter syndrome. He always was saying, I'm going to fail this exam. Don't get your hopes up about me. And they have found a correlation between people that experience feeling fraudulent in life, or as they're not going to succeed, having really successful siblings. So that's
that
one.
Makes a lot of sense.
And the second one is when your parents go on and on and on about how incredible you are, and then that's that personhood. You've built up this sense of, oh my goodness, I'm this incredible person, and I walk out. But the world tells you different signals. You fail this test, you don't pass this bar exam, you don't get the job. The world is saying that's really bad work. And so all of a sudden you have this disconnect of, hang on a sec, I've been told my whole life how amazing I am, and the world is not telling me. And so they have kind of found these really two interesting reasons of people who claim to have it. So is it a thing? I mean, I think it's a thing, but I don't like what it's become.
Do you think those two reasons, it feels like there might be a third, because one of them is you've been compared your whole life and found yourself to fall short.
Yes.
You've got a very intellectually superior sibling. But the second one is almost you've been told you're so amazing and the world doesn't reflect that. Would the third one be your parents have also maybe not told you they're amazing that much? Like, I just think a lot because obviously relationships with mothers and daughters can be kind of complicated. I saw a really funny thing on TikTok the other day about a mother to her son being like, you're so amazing, everything's about you so great, come back here, let me give you another kiss. And then how she'd interact with her daughter, and it's like, should you really be wearing that?
Honestly,
and I feel like we've all experienced that.
Women, it's like you've got this thing you can build, and I've got a daughter, and it's like she's gonna go. There's so much pressure on women to go out and be amazing.
I just wonder if there is that third thing of maybe, and the reason I say that is I came from an incredibly supportive household, but my parents didn't. I don't know, like, I don't think they necessarily thought about it that much, or maybe they just assumed we'd all be fine at school. I don't think they particularly cared about us being the top of the class or anything. So I didn't get any feedback at home about intelligence. And that's the other example I thought I had about imposter syndrome, but I don't know if it was. I think it might have just been confidence that when I first, your first time you go to an exam at school is when you're 15. And I thought I was dumb. I didn't think I was going to pass because I'd never had any feedback really about my intelligence. And then, of course, the marks came back. I did great all the way through school. By the end of school, I'd convinced myself I was a teacher's pet. Teachers loved me. They all knew me. Of course they were going to give me great marks.
But didn't you find your records a couple of weeks ago?
They didn't. Spoiler alert. They did not love me nearly as much as I thought.
I feel like we're talking about delusion here. And when we talk about Anna Delvey and Catch Me If You Can, maybe we'll get into actual imposters later.
But I feel like all these examples and all of those sort of three elements to it, or three things that people have in common, it really does make this, and the fact that so many people suffer from it, it really does make you think, is this just become, like many things, an umbrella term that covers everything from what we might describe as true imposter syndrome all the way through to I failed and I feel bad, or I'm actually doing something that I don't feel comfortable doing because I am not good at it yet, all the way through, like, is it covering a whole range of things?
Yeah, and I think if you were to ask any woman about a promotion or putting your hands up to take the project, absolutely there'll be those that say I'm the right person for the job. But for the most part, what we've experienced as part of Powrsuit is people say, I'm not ready, I don't have the skills, and so therefore I lack confidence in putting my hand out. Now, is that imposter syndrome? I think that's what you're challenging now. I don't think so. I think that is, you're wavering in your abilities. You possibly are not feeling as confident as you should be because there's no evidence. There probably is evidence, to be fair, but there might not be evidence if you're trying something new. And we like to feel comfortable and know the thing before we do the next thing. And so is it a thing? I think the intention behind the study was that they meant it to be a phenomenon, not a syndrome. And we should just chat about that a little bit. Syndrome feels like a psychiatric term. You are diagnosed with something. Now, this isn't a psychiatric diagnosis. This is a fleeting feeling that humans get. And they were able to kind of credit the humans. Isn't that interesting? This is maybe where they got it from. But their intention wasn't that you put a label on yourself and own it. Syndrome reeks to me and others of women, of hysteria, of this, you are this label. We have a lot of labels now for people. Is syndrome the label we need to get rid of? Because their intention was phenomenon. This is a normal human thing that we all feel, and possibly
phenomenon
fleeting.
Is far more open.
Yeah.
This could be a perfectly rational response to a whole bunch of external factors,
yes,
rather than a flaw in my brain or who I am. And I think that switch, I wonder how it got switched. It makes you wonder, did it, because my understanding,
I feel like someone wrote a book, and if you were to Google it right now, 5 million, if you were to Google imposter syndrome, 5 million hits come back, of which it's $1 billion self-help industry. So at some point someone came out, said, this is a syndrome, this is a thing that is a label, and we're going to help you fix it.
I love that. That's very much the classic, how do we weaponize things about women back at them and get them to spend money. I think the beauty industry is another example of how do we convince women that they need to live up to these unrealistic beauty standards and then make an industry out of selling them stuff. I mean, you see it all over the show. And it would be really interesting to trace back to when it changed from this idea of this is a phenomenon that seems to have happened. There's no causation there. We don't know why it's happened. We think there's some ingredients in common. The idea of coming from a household with a smart sibling, or a household where, or a situation where this your innate belief about yourself and society don't necessarily reflect the same thing. How did that get turned into something that became, you now have a problem? That's such a fascinating switch that has somewhere along the line happened, and now has led to all of us internalizing this idea that I have this massive thing that stops me from being able to believe in myself in different situations. I also, when I was looking into this, feel like on top of the two things around smart sibling parents, is there are two other
it's always the parents' fault.
It's always
I've told my mum that. I'm like, you're at fault here somewhere.
They actually can't do right. Like, I genuinely think you either tell your children they're so great and then the world tells you otherwise, or you don't tell them they're great and they believe they're not great. I mean, like, you've got those two options. Both of them are terrible. The other two things that I think are key ingredients for it to be genuine imposter syndrome that seems to differentiate it from just your classic everyday run-of-the-mill self-confidence issues that women suffer from is recognition. The third thing feels like recognition. You need to be in a place or a situation where you don't feel like you belong. And I think for you, in your example, you are in amongst these incredibly, the 1% of the 1%, these incredibly polished, refined people who have silver spoons everywhere. For a lot of other people, I mean, for the two women who created the study, they are at Harvard or some other elite university thinking, how did I end up here? Tom Hanks is like, how did I become the biggest celebrity in the world and known as the world's nicest man? Lovely, lovely guy. So that feels like a really key ingredient. And the reason I think it's important to pull that out is that a lot of women and a lot of women in minorities actually don't suffer from imposter syndrome because they never get the recognition. Or they're always they're
underestimated. They're underestimated,
right.
Absolutely. But so when they hear all these white women, and this was a fantastic article by Harvard Business Review, which is amazing, Nat, you have to find the authors of that and call them out on this podcast because I've written them somewhere. But I think I
have it.
Do you have them?
I think it's Ruchika.
Yes.
And Jodie Ann. Ruchika Tulls Cheyenne, I believe, my
great.
Terrible Kiwi accent,
yes.
And Jodie Ann Burry.
So now they've called out, they've called out imposter syndrome, and they are women of color in America, and they have gone, what are you white people all on about? Because the world is built for you, and how you feel that you don't belong in it is crazy to us. So talk about the real imposters. They are saying, you know, we should be the real imposters here, but we don't have this syndrome or don't feel this because we know we don't belong. We know the system's actually broken.
Yeah.
And so we set the expectation that if we even get to the table, that's an absolute win. And so it was such an interesting article saying, stop telling women they have imposter syndrome. Check it out.
I really like that it's sort of that old adage about a murderer with two children and one of them became a murderer.
Did you say a murderer?
Yeah, it is because two children of the murderer, one became a murderer saying, of course I did, look at my parent. And the other one became like a human rights activist and said, of course I did, look at my parent. And I feel like when you think about imposter syndrome and the structures that have created this idea that we don't exist, because it probably is largely structures, some women react by going, oh my goodness, I'm at fault. I'm an imposter. Other women go, nah, I fought hard to get here.
That's right.
I deserve to be here more than anyone.
That's right.
Don't you throw that back at me as like I'm an imposter, because I know I am, and I've worked really hard to overcome it. And I think that is an extremely valid point. And it is interesting, that idea of the world is built for us, because I would push back slightly on that. I think it's more built for us, but I think one of the challenges of imposter syndrome is recognition. One of the ingredients is recognition. And when you're looking above you in your career and you don't see anyone who looks like you, and that you could be a white woman, you could be a brown woman, you could be a black woman, and you don't see an awful lot of them. Like in general, what is it, like 29% of board seats taken up by women, 8% of CEOs of large companies. I don't think we need to compete over who has it worse.
Yes.
But I think we need to recognise that some of us should potentially examine our privilege a bit more, that we have the right to, or have the ability, not the right, the privilege to even get into situations where we can look around and say...
I couldn't agree more. It's a little bit like those that I hear that they say they don't vote. And I say, but why not? And they say, but why? And I say, because you have the opportunity to have a voice. And it's almost like we have got, as relatively privileged women, the opportunity to step in. And so I've always taken it, I suppose. But I absolutely respect those that have the wobbles. Now,
can I just get on to the fourth ingredient?
Yes.
Just because otherwise I feel like people are going to be like, you said there were 4 and you've only given 3. Which I think actually just goes quite nicely into what I suspect you might be saying. The fourth ingredient, I think, is for it to be a syndrome, it has to be innate. And we've sort of talked about this a bit. And I think we both now believe, I would think, there is no syndrome. There's no such thing as a bunch of women who have caught this imposter disease that is passed around, with one exception maybe, which I'll get to soon. So I think those 4 ingredients, if you actually weigh up confidence against this feeling, this intense feeling of being a fraud, and I think it's really important to have this conversation, because if we're all saying this, and I think you have a great story from your stepdad that you just told me before, the words are important.
Yes.
And not only is syndrome to phenomenon to syndrome important, the word imposter is. Like, do you want to tell us his story?
Yeah,
because
well,
I just think it's really
of
powerful.
course I said, because we were driving, I've got parents visiting from Canada, and we were driving around, and I said, we're about to shoot this podcast, record this podcast on imposter syndrome. And they said, oh, I think I've heard of it, but what is it? And when I described it, my stepdad had such a visceral reaction. He said, I would absolutely hate if someone were to label me as having imposter syndrome. The reason being is because they are labeling me as an imposter. And imagine if you had labeled yourself liar. You had liar syndrome.
Yeah.
He had such an awful negative. Now, this is someone, it's become so normalized. We use this language. You're an imposter, you're an imposter, you're an imposter, I'm an imposter. Whereas he's going, imagine if you called yourself a liar, or something else, some derogatory term. Would you want to label yourself that? So it was so interesting, the reaction that he had.
I think and it's really interesting that an older white man that came up with that, because I feel like one of the things we as a society are challenging ourselves to do at the moment is to stop labeling people as the things that they have.
Yes.
So rather than calling someone a homeless person, which indicates that I am at fault, I am a person who is homeless, it is I am unhoused. I don't currently have a house.
Yes, right.
I'm not an imposter.
Yes.
I am experiencing this thing that makes me feel something. I'm not unemployed.
And
it's
it
not
something
who I
that's,
am.
It's a state. It's possibly a state. And what I think the Harvard Business Review article that were saying, look, we've used this term for 50 years, let's bid it goodbye, is they were saying this is a label that entrenches people in their position of weakness, because you've labeled yourself as you are the person that's done something wrong. You've got the label on your forehead, when actually it's the system that has made you feel that way. It's a structure that isn't quite fit for purpose. It's leadership that you don't relate to. And so they're saying the term is actually more harmful than beneficial in order to go get help for and get over.
I so agree. And I feel like we should talk a bit more about that. The one exception to that I think is our fault, because I think we should take accountability, is I think one element could be the social contagion element. And I've been in this position so many times, I'm not sure if you have, where someone asks you to do something and you put your hand up to do it, or someone asks a group, or you just actively reach out and ask to do something, and you are surrounded by women who often say, oh, I couldn't do that, I don't have anything important to share, or who would want to listen to me, or I don't have the skills. That message you're sending to the women who put their hand up is you're arrogant. Like, you are literally saying, by that lack of self-confidence and saying I couldn't do it, is, oh, because you can, you are someone who is pushy or putting yourself forward or backs yourself too much.
That's where and that's, to your words, are really important. We've talked about imposter and syndrome, and I think your thinking is that then women that do are seen as aggressive. You know, we are described, Nat, as passionate or intense. I've heard
intense.
Kristen is really intense. And that was not in a positive sense.
No,
that
it
was
never is.
very negative.
I love the word,
Yeah.
but it's never said to us
Whereas
like that.
a male would be charismatic, or they'd be a leader, ambitious, whatever. And that's okay. You can't be ambitious as a woman. But I agree with you. But I just wonder if they've been so beaten down
Absolutely.
in a structure that's has not supported them.
Absolutely, but I feel like the contagion part comes from when you're in a group of people saying, I couldn't do that, why would anyone want to listen to me? You are far less likely to go, oh, they definitely want to listen to me. I'm great.
True.
And so it's much easier to go, oh, actually, maybe no one wants to listen to me either.
Right. So we all need to climb out.
Yeah, so I think we all need to climb out. But also, I mean, I think, again, words are important. The other way to be like, how do you get the confidence to do that? I'd love to learn off you. What could it's changing to our language to sort of that thing we talk about a lot. When you are lacking in confidence, you become inherently selfish. Your world focuses around you and how you're presented and how you come across, rather than outward to how do I learn and what can you offer me and what can I offer you.
Yes.
And so when you're in a situation where another woman puts their hand up or does something that's really bold or courageous, be careful about what you say in response, because the underconfident words coming out is I can't, which does put an impact on someone else. The better words to come out is that's so amazing. How did you get to the point you could do
rather
that?
than feel
Celebrate people who
threatened.
don't feel these things.
I think what you're saying is just landing with me now, because there is a very small percentage who claim not to have it, and they are almost apologetic as a result. So I hear that. And I don't feel it either. I don't feel apologetic. But you know, it's so interesting. Look to the other spectrum of people who are actually genuinely don't have it. We're talking Elizabeth Holmes, and we are obsessed with these people that genuinely, to be fair, they're imposters, they're cons. And so
they
you
actually
think
do have imposter
they
syndrome.
actually are imposters. And we're chatting, you said Finding Anna? Is that the name of it?
I think it's
Inventing
Anna.
Inventing Anna. That was amazing. And then Elizabeth Holmes. And they live in these parallel universes where they genuinely believe their hype. They genuinely believe, and we are fascinated by these people these women, they are, that actually believe their hype and their cons.
Yes, but actually, I think we should dig in for the last part of this is if we do believe that imposter phenomenon is an experience you have as a result of numerous things that happen that make you feel truly like you are an imposter or that you are a fraud. Let's talk a little bit about why we're in that position and the structural things that leave us here, and sort of challenge this notion of, should we, after listening to this podcast, all make a concerted effort to maybe not label it as imposter syndrome and maybe think of a new term around I am the first to do something, or I am lacking in role models that look like me, or whatever it is. Because to me, you can't be what you can't see. And I think that's probably the reason why so many minorities and women feel it a lot more, is when you're using one of the ingredients, you're highly successful, you're in these crazy environments. If you're alone in that environment and you haven't got any role models to see, of course you're more likely to see yourself as that. That is not something that you, I, or anyone feeling like an imposter can solve on their own.
No, I agree. As for the systemic issues, we're chatting about often worlds that aren't perfectly built for us. But at Powrsuit, we are coming at it from an angle of, this is going to be a really hard world to dismantle, and we want to engage with it. So we've got a bunch of women that we want, that are Powrsuiters, that we want on this movement with us. And our belief is that we believe we can dismantle it from the inside out. So we don't want women burning out. We want to equip them with the tools where they can step forward and put their hands up and everything and dismantle the system. But to the systemic issues, they're there. I don't know how to solve all of them, but I know that there's gaslighting. I know there's microaggression. I know there's bullying. And every time that happens, the spotlight turns to you and you say, is there something wrong with me? So I know that's out there. How we solve it, I'm not sure. Is that we equip women with so much of a shield, so much of a community, so much of a support group where they go, no, that's just gaslighting. And I mean, I don't know the answer, but it's certainly what we're
and I think we should talk about a few more of the the actual social things that lead to this. So gaslighting, just for anyone who's not aware, and actually I talked to someone a while ago who didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
And I think the definition you gave before of that you're in this situation and the cues coming back to you are different from what you believe, I think is a really great definition of gaslighting.
Yeah.
So it's basically when someone tells you that what you know to be true is not true. So in this case, you have earned your right to a seat at the table. You are equally as capable, if not more so, than the other people at the table, and yet all the cues coming back to you are that you're not.
Yeah.
That would be a form of gaslighting. That is someone telling
and then you start,
what you know
and then
to be
you
true isn't.
genuinely start to doubt your reality. And so
course.
it could be that it leads to imposter syndrome. You feel like, gosh, I'm really, not meant to be here, but certainly erodes confidence.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So being aware of that, actually having that in your tool belt of if you feel like you deserve to be there, if you've got good reason to believe you are and you're getting external cues that you're not, just be aware that that is actually a form, well, it's actually a form of abuse, but it's a form and it's the most extreme, but in a workplace and around you, that is something that could be impacting your confidence and this feeling of imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
The second thing that I think structurally is something that, and to what you were saying before about Powrsuit, is this billion-dollar industry that's sprung up around imposter syndrome. I would suggest that most of it's focused around building women's confidence, and I say that in quotation marks. Scrap that. Like if it's a social reason, if it's social structures, social biases that lead us to believe we don't deserve to be there, then teaching women to be more confident in a system that's not working for them is not going to solve the problem. It's just going to take money out of their pockets even more. So I feel like one of the reasons why we started Powrsuit is absolutely equipping women to understand and see these structures and be better equipped to deal with them, but also to really raise awareness and conversations around these are the structures we live in. And anytime someone pretends it's a women's confidence issue, we need to all be comfortable saying, is it though?
Yeah.
Or is it actually a system that I don't belong in? This system wasn't designed for us.
Worn us down. I was speaking to this, and I don't want to call it imposter syndrome, because what we've established here is there is a catch-all. And anytime we tend to have confidence or we're feeling a bit down, we might label ourselves with that. So we need to be really careful. But I did speak to an incredible woman CEO yesterday who is going through a capital raise, and there's some issues with it. So she's gone back to investors and is being gaslit and is being told messages that she is the problem, or she is greedy, or she is this and that. And when I spoke to her yesterday, this is someone who I actually tried to hire for years. I've tried to grab her, and all these other startups are grabbing her, and she's exhausted, and she's actually starting to believe those messages. So again, now imagine then if she labels herself, and it's this, when you start to deteriorate, and that Harvard Business Review article actually showed these women of color in particular trying to navigate the system that isn't for them, and they've completely a shell of their former selves. So I almost saw this happening, which made me really concerned and angry. I don't know how to solve it, but I think support and community. I just said, do you have someone that is going through this? And she said, I'm kind of working from home and I should probably reach out. No, yes, you should. You need to get with other women that have been through this process, that have your back and can build you back up. Because I believe, as part of Powrsuit, one of our beliefs is as a community, we can do this together.
And even coaching is another example there, because that's what
people have been there before.
Time.
Absolutely.
And I think that even that conversation you had, I think that's part of the solution of flipping the script of she probably came to you saying, this and I've done this and this has not worked and I don't feel like I belong here and I don't feel like this. And even just you challenging that, saying, seems to me that actually there's an environment in which you're being gaslit, that you're being blamed on a problem that is a company-wide problem, or that is actually a very powerful solution in itself.
So we just need to connect, don't we? I mean, we also had a really great conversation with a venture capitalist when we went traveling, didn't we? And she was a fantastic woman venture capitalist, and she had a couple points about checking ourselves in a space, didn't you? What were her 3 points?
I'm struggling to remember them in detail, but I feel like that probably is one of the actions we can take this week, so we can move into action.
Great, let's do it.
Because I think there's 2 this week, and the first one is building your case of evidence, and I think her example led into that. So she said there's 3 things you can do if you're feeling it. and she was talking about it, I think, specifically in a meeting context. Do you understand what's happening? That's step one. If you're in this meeting and you feel like you don't deserve to be there, do you actually understand what's going on around you? Yeah? Great. Okay. Second thing, if you ask a question, do people nod or say, oh, great question, or look interested in the answer?
Yeah.
Great.
Because they're all thinking it anyway.
You are now not only
it.
just following along, you are preempting what's next.
Yes.
And adding value in that way. If you're doing that, then thirdly, the last thing is, are you answering the questions? Are you in a position that you actually know the answers to some of the questions?
And or you're adding value to the conversation.
Absolutely.
You're making people think about something different. So I just love that she had spent a ton of time in this area. Incredible. And she invests in a lot of women startups in biotech and really interesting areas. But it was so interesting that she said, here's some hard evidence that you can quickly get over feeling like an imposter in a space if you know what's going on and you're engaging. Now, if you don't, she wasn't saying there was anything wrong with the person. She said there was probably a values conflict. You probably are in the wrong place, and that's okay.
And
so
that's actually, it may not be okay. It's actually okay to leave those situations.
That's right.
But I think that's the thing. If everyone gets out of this thinking, we're not slamming the use of the word imposter syndrome. It is a very real feeling that people feel. It could be a range of emotions that are currently put under that umbrella.
Yes.
And that maybe we need to get a little bit clearer on which ones we're feeling when, which is actually a good thing to do in general. We should all be labeling our emotions a lot more, because we only label like 3 and there's about 1,000 of them. So that's worthy of doing. But it is a real phenomenon, and it does impact people. So it's okay in some situations to go, I am an imposter here. I do not align with these values. I mean, that's what I did. I left that workplace.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I said, this is not who I am. I'm an imposter. I actually need to get out of it. Great. The last thing with
we're gonna focus on the first action still.
Yes, I was gonna say the last thing with the first action.
Yes.
With building an evidence case, because I think you've got some ideas as well, is that so that's one tactic, and I think you can apply that in meetings, but probably in any situation. If I take that out to a workplace, am I adding value? Am I understanding what's happening in my team? Do I ask questions in meetings? Like you can use that same exercise. I think that's a really useful one. That evidence can look quite different. I talked earlier about starting this business very young. I at one point hired a business mentor through a chamber, I think it was Wellington Chamber of Commerce, something like that, because I felt like a fraud. I was like, I can't see how this is successful. I just couldn't. And he came in and he kept talking to me about what did I need. And I was like, can you just go and find out where the problem is? Because it feels like it's working, but it just can't be. And he actually went through every single one of my accounts and all my business and came back going, this is a very successful business. And he spent 3 months as a mentor doing that with me, just to get me over this mental hurdle that I felt like I did not belong in this world. I was too young. I was too female.
So it was evidence.
Yeah. And I feel like that's another form. You've probably got a few more.
Yeah, well, evidence folder, evidence file, and you can log it in your brain or physically do it. That's actually a therapist would ask you to do that. But it is really important, because what you are is you are having the world reflect something different to you. We talked about the personhood, and you have to start to collect facts and evidence. You have to put aside your feelings, because we know that they can be quite negative about ourselves, and you have to put them aside and you have to start to gather the facts. So for me, it is kind of how I operate. I operate with evidence. And so when I was in that situation in New York, and there's incredible people around me, and I was like, oh my goodness, they're going to be so much smarter than me. After 2 weeks of working with them, I realized actually they weren't smarter than me. They had had a different experience in life than I had, but I brought just as much value to the table as they had. So I mentally noted every time when I heard someone say something, or, sometimes when people repeat things to make themselves sound smart.
Or repeat what you said to claim.
Yeah, I was like, oh, all this is actually happening everywhere in the world. This group is no different. I mean, humans intellectually, just because they have XYZ education, aren't above the rest of us. So I was like, oh, okay, I actually fit in this world. Not only do I fit in this world, but to that third point of I'm engaging in it, I'm adding value in it. So I quickly collected evidence. I was open to it. I felt uncomfortable at first, but I was very open to collecting evidence that actually I was as much of a powerhouse in that room as everyone else. And so I felt I totally held my own by the end of that. So, but that was through evidence collection and being able to say, that was a phenomenon. That was a passing, fleeting feeling. I'm going to put it aside for obvious reasons, but I'm going to put it aside now because I belong here. And that was really powerful for me. And I'll keep that with me forever, that I actually belong anywhere at any table in the universe.
Yeah, I love that. And I think there are two types of evidence you talked about there. One is you belonging, that what you bring to the table. But the second one, which is something that I feel like I realized a long time ago, the more various situations in life you end up hanging out with people who, or in my life anyway, who are extremely accomplished and very successful, very intimidating. And the more time you hang out with them, the more you realize everyone's life is messy.
Yes.
Every human is messy.
Yeah,
no one is perfect. And once you have that realization, you lose that feeling of I don't belong, because you go, I know. And my sister's had it too, running with someone once, and she's like, if I just met this person through work, I would have thought they're incredible. And now I just see them as another human.
Yeah, we're just trying to get through the day.
Wrong. It's another human.
I know.
We're all the same underneath.
I love it. So what's the last action?
The second action. And this is sort of, I've put this under the umbrella, because today we're talking a lot about umbrellas, of changing your mindset. So I think the evidence box actually does do that. This one is more specific. So there's two little tactics here. First one is something we can all do right away, is when you're walking around throughout the day and people give you compliments about how lovely you look, or about a great piece of work you've done, or about how nice the dinner you cooked is, notice what you do as a result. Are you brushing them off? Are you attributing your successes to luck? Are you diffusing? Is it diffusing or redirecting the praise? Just pay attention and see the way you present yourself in public. And then if you want a bonus step, maybe go switch that up a bit and go, thank you. Instead of making up an excuse. But the second part of that, the second action, which I really, really love, which I stole from a friend who's doing it through this, and it sounds like an incredible course, very intensive, is reframe your expectations. And the way she talked about it was, what if it all turned out well?
Yes.
What if it was great?
Yeah.
And so she said the exercise they got given to do is go back in time and think about some challenges you've had, some times when you were very uncertain or you thought things were going to fall apart, and fast forward again and think about how they turned out. And
probably fine.
Well, she said it was hilarious because everyone, of course, is like, everything turned out great. And so in that case, then you can start to go, well, what are the things that I'm worried about now? Okay, well, what are all the ways in which they could turn out great? So if you're feeling that feeling of I don't belong here, what are all the ways it could turn out great? One of them could be I'm leaving the situation. The other ones could be I nail this report, or I nail this job.
And I absolutely agree. And I have heard it repeated to me as upside opportunity. I focus on the upside opportunity.
You do.
Well,
you do.
Oh, okay. Well, I didn't know this because I know nothing about myself, but this amazing Sheridan Broadbent, get a name drop. She's this, oh my gosh, she's this inspiring leader in New Zealand. She sits on a chair of a massive organization. And she said to me, do you know what I like about you, Kristen? And I was like, do tell, Sheridan Broadbent. And she said, you focus on the upside opportunity and you ignore the downside risk. And I said, maybe that's stupidity, maybe it's ignorance, and it's why startup people do startups, because they're not focused on all the things that can go wrong. But she said, it's what I like about you. And so I folded this into one of my talks that I do give, is focus on the upside opportunity. Think about how incredible it could be should it go.
That's so funny, because you've always played that role in my life too. I feel like even when we started Powrsuit,
who knew?
You were like, why not us? And I was like, I've got about 100 million reasons why not. But I actually tried to do it. I applied to talk at an event the other day, and my brain, I noticed, because we're talking about imposter syndrome, immediately went to, they're never going to pick me. All the reasons why not. And then I reminded myself, why not me? What if it all panned out? So I've decided to quite consciously visualize and get really excited about this thing. And if it doesn't come through, it doesn't come through. I'm not super worried about that. What it is exciting to do, though, is rather than be like, oh, no, to be like, why not me? How exciting would it be if it happened?
Just take the step.
So, again, we're probably wrapping up where we started, that we're both deluded and dumb.
Yeah, maybe. But look, I think that was great. Hopefully people walk away, and when they label themselves next time, they can think a little bit, is this an actual thing? What is it? Dig a bit deeper, start to collect some evidence, start to change the mindset, and really step into that, and actually just be mindful of it. I think that's probably great. Now, Powrsuit.com, that's where you can find us. Do you have this label genuinely? How is it that you're helping yourself to get out of it? Or how can we help yourself to get out of it? And I think we'll leave it there. What a great one, Nat.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Thanks.